Clara sat in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the faint glow of the city lights outside her window. The hum of traffic below rose and fell like a tired lullaby. Yet she couldn't sleep. The walls around her felt colder than usual, and the bed she shared with Adrian was just as empty as her heart. He wasn't home again, he rarely was. Business dinners, late meetings, cases that dragged into the night, those were always his excuses. She used to believe him. She used to wait for him with dinners that grew cold on the table, her heart clinging to hope. But years of the same routine had stripped her of illusions. Somewhere deep inside, Clara knew the truth: Adrian loved ambition more than he ever loved her. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Don't wait up. Important client. I'll be late." No apology, no tenderness, no warmth. Just another reminder that she was nothing more than a shadow in his life. Clara put the phone down and pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the heavy ache there. She thought of the girl she once was, the young woman who had walked down the aisle with dreams in her eyes, who had promised forever to a man who had promised her the world. She had given him everything, her loyalty, her patience, her sacrifices. But what had she received in return? Silence, neglect, loneliness. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into weeks. Adrian grew sharper, more calculating, more distant. The man who once held her hand had become a stranger, consumed by the hunger for success. Clara tried to reach him, tried to remind him of the love they once shared, but every time, her words fell against a wall of indifference. One evening, rain lashed against the city, streaking the windows with silver trails. Clara waited at the dining table, a simple meal laid out before her. She told herself she wouldn't cry, that she was stronger than the tears threatening to fall. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the chair across from her remained empty. She lowered her gaze, her fork untouched, her appetite gone. Her phone buzzed again. Another excuse, another late night, another lie. Clara finally whispered into the empty room, "Do I even exist in your world anymore, Adrian?" But silence answered her. The weeks that followed brought not just emotional pain but physical exhaustion. Clara's body began to weaken, her health slipping through her fingers. She had ignored the warning signs for too long, skipped meals, sleepless nights, the toll of constant stress. Adrian barely noticed, or perhaps he did and simply chose not to care. He was always chasing something bigger, something brighter, never realizing that what he was leaving behind was dimming, fading, breaking. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Clara lay on the bed, her skin pale, her breaths shallow. Machines beeped softly beside her, monitoring a life that was slipping away too quickly. She turned her head slightly, hoping, just once, that Adrian would walk through the door, that he would see her and remember she had once been his everything. But the door never opened. He never came. The nurses did their best to comfort her, but no comfort could heal the hollowness inside her chest. Clara closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. The first time Adrian had smiled at her, the way he held her hand when they were young, the promises he whispered on their wedding day. All of it felt like fragments of a dream, scattered and broken. A tear slid down her cheek. She whispered into the empty room, "If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't waste my heart on you." And with that final breath of regret, Clara's world faded into darkness. But death was not the end. Somewhere between silence and eternity, Clara felt herself pulled backward, as if time itself had unraveled. She gasped, her eyes snapping open, only to find herself not in the sterile hospital room, but in a place startlingly familiar. Her bedroom, but different, younger, fresher. She rushed to the mirror, her heart racing. The face staring back at her wasn't the tired, fading woman she had last seen. It was her younger self. Her fingers trembled as she touched her cheeks, her skin smooth and full of life. She looked around, recognizing the apartment she had lived in years ago, before the marriage, before the sacrifices, before Adrian had drained the color from her world. Her phone rang, startling her. She picked it up and froze when she saw the name on the screen. Adrian. Memories rushed back, the lies, the loneliness, the regret. But now, Clara wasn't the same woman who had once answered that call with hope in her voice. She wasn't the same woman who had wasted years waiting for a man who would never value her. This time would be different. Clara took a deep breath, let the phone ring, and placed it back on the table. A strange, powerful calm settled over her. She had been given something extraordinary, a second chance. And she wasn't going to waste it. The morning sunlight spilled gently through the curtains, painting warm stripes across the floor. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could hear the faint sounds of life outside, children rushing to school, vendors calling out in the street, the ordinary bustle of a world that suddenly felt brand new. Her mind raced, struggling to comprehend what had happened. Last night, no, it wasn't last night. It was years ago in another life. She had died, alone, abandoned in a sterile hospital room. But now, somehow, she had been pulled back to this moment in time. She could feel her youth in her bones, the strength in her body, the fire that had long been extinguished now flickering again. The phone on the nightstand lit up once more. Adrian. The name glared at her, the same as before. She stared at it, memories of countless disappointments flooding her chest. But instead of answering, instead of falling back into the trap of hope, Clara let it ring until it went silent. And in that silence, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. She stood, walking to the mirror again, studying her reflection. The woman staring back wasn't worn and weary, she was alive. She touched her face, her lips curving into a small smile. This was her chance to rewrite everything, to live differently, to finally choose herself. Instead of dressing up to wait for Adrian or planning her day around his calls, Clara dressed in comfortable clothes, pulled her hair back, and stepped outside. The city smelled different to her now, fresher, sharper. She noticed the laughter of children, the smell of roasted chestnuts from a nearby stall, the energy in the air. It was as though the world itself had been reborn alongside her. For the first time in years, Clara walked with no weight on her shoulders. She returned to the school where she had once taught before Adrian convinced her to quit and support his career. The building stood tall, familiar yet filled with memories she thought she had lost. Clara's steps slowed as she approached the gates, her chest tight with emotion. Inside, the sounds of students echoed down the hallways, chatter, laughter, the shuffling of books. Clara placed a hand against the wall, feeling the pulse of life here. This was where she had once been happiest, before the sacrifices, before the years lost to loneliness. This had been her sanctuary. She walked into the principal's office, nerves fluttering in her stomach. The man behind the desk, older now but still sharp-eyed, looked up at her in surprise. "Clara, is that really you?" She smiled, her voice steady. "It's me. I'd like to come back, if there's still a place for me here." The principal leaned back, studying her. For a moment, Clara feared rejection, that somehow fate would find a way to deny her again. But then his lips curved into a smile. "There's always been a place for you, Clara. We'd be lucky to have you back." Relief washed over her, tears stinging her eyes. This was it, the first step in reclaiming her life. In the weeks that followed, Clara threw herself into her teaching with a passion that surprised even her. She loved the way her students' eyes lit up when they understood a lesson, the way they ran to show her their work, the way they leaned on her for guidance. She wasn't just filling her days, she was shaping futures, and in turn, finding healing for herself. Each morning, she woke up with purpose. Each night, she went to bed tired but content, and for the first time in years, her laughter returned, bubbling up naturally when a student cracked a silly joke or when colleagues gathered in the staff room for tea. Adrian's calls became fewer and fewer as she ignored them, until eventually, they stopped altogether. The absence of his voice felt like fresh air, like a door closing on a prison cell. She no longer wondered where he was, who he was with, or what excuses he would spin. None of it mattered anymore. He wasn't part of her story this time. But fate had one more surprise waiting. Months later, Clara stood in front of her class, chalk in hand. When she felt a wave of dizziness, she pressed a hand to her temple, steadying herself. But the sensation didn't pass. Her colleague rushed over, concern in his eyes. "Clara, are you all right?" She forced a smile, though her heart raced. "I'm fine, just a little lightheaded." But she wasn't fine. Days later, the truth revealed itself. Clara was pregnant. She sat alone in her apartment, staring at the test in her hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. In her first life, she had longed for this moment, prayed for it, begged for Adrian's attention, his love, his willingness to start a family. But he had always pushed it aside. Not now. Maybe later. My career comes first. Later had never come. And yet here she was, blessed with the child she had once thought impossible. Her heart swelled with emotions too big to contain: fear, joy, wonder, hope. She touched her stomach gently, whispering, "It's just you and me now, and I promise I won't let you down." From that day forward, Clara's life gained a new rhythm. She balanced her teaching with preparing for motherhood, pouring her soul into creating a safe and loving home. She painted the walls of the nursery herself, choosing soft colors, humming lullabies she hadn't sung in years. Her colleagues noticed the glow in her cheeks, the strength in her step. Even when exhaustion weighed her down, Clara carried it with pride. This wasn't just survival anymore, this was life, real and meaningful. As the months passed and her belly grew, she often paused to reflect. She thought of the woman she had been in that hospital room, the one who had whispered her final words of regret. She thought of Adrian, of the years she had wasted, of the tears she had shed, but none of it mattered now. That life was gone. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined to live it fully. On the day her daughter was born, Clara held the tiny bundle in her arms, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it brought her to tears. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, fragile but strong, as if promising her they would walk this path together. Clara kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering through her tears, "You are my reason, my miracle, my future." And with that, she knew her rebirth was complete. The little apartment that once felt lonely was now filled with life. Clara's days began not with silence, but with the soft coos of her daughter stirring awake, the sweet weight of tiny arms reaching for her, the sound of innocent laughter echoing through the rooms. The once quiet walls seemed to breathe now, painted with the colors of motherhood. Clara named her daughter Lily. It was a name that carried gentleness and resilience, just like the flowers that bloomed even through the cracks of a stone path. And Lily, true to her name, grew with the same quiet strength, her presence softening every corner of Clara's heart. Mornings became a dance of routine, preparing breakfast with Lily perched in a high chair, chalk dust on Clara's hands as she hurried to finish grading papers before rushing to the nursery, laughter spilling as Lily tugged at her hair when she bent down to kiss her forehead. Life was no longer about waiting for someone to come home, it was about being fully present in the home she was building with her daughter. At school, Clara's colleagues noticed the change in her. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. When she walked into a classroom, her students' faces lit up, drawn to her warmth and patience. She became not just a teacher, but a mentor, someone who believed in them even when they doubted themselves. And in the evenings, when Lily slept peacefully in her crib, Clara would sit by the window, watching the city lights. But unlike before, the glow outside no longer reminded her of loneliness. It reminded her of possibility. Time moved swiftly, each season leaving behind new memories. Spring brought Lily's first steps across the living room floor, her chubby arms outstretched toward her mother. Summer brought afternoons at the park, where Lily giggled as she chased butterflies while Clara cheered her on. Autumn came with its golden leaves, which Clara and Lily collected in little baskets for school projects. And winter wrapped their world in warmth, not from wealth or grandeur, but from the simple joy of reading bedtime stories by the glow of a lamp. Clara sometimes thought of Adrian during these quiet moments, but never with longing. Instead, she thought of him with clarity. He had been the storm that taught her how to rebuild. He had been the shadow that made her treasure the light. His absence was no longer a wound, it was a blessing. One evening, as she tucked Lily into bed, the little girl looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama," she murmured, "why don't I have a papa like the other kids?" The question pierced Clara's heart, but she smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "Because not all families look the same, sweetheart. Some have two parents, some have one, and some are built from love in different ways. What matters most is that you are loved, every single day." Lily yawned, her tiny hand gripping Clara's fingers. "And you love me?" "With all my heart," Clara whispered, kissing her daughter's hand, "more than anything in this world." Lily drifted to sleep, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of dreams. Clara sat for a while longer, watching her, feeling the weight of gratitude press against her chest. This was the life she had chosen, and it was everything she had ever needed. Years passed, and Lily grew into a curious, bright-eyed girl who seemed to carry pieces of Clara's strength within her. She had her mother's determination, her sharp mind, and a spark in her eyes that made people stop and notice. Clara couldn't help but feel pride every time she saw her daughter running ahead, unafraid of the world. At the same time, Clara's own reputation as a teacher blossomed. She was known not only for her dedication but for the way she nurtured students who struggled, never giving up on them. Parents sought her out, colleagues admired her, and even the principal often reminded her that she was one of the school's greatest assets. And still, she lived quietly, content to keep her circle small, her joy rooted in simple things. But fate, as it always did, had its own plans. One crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Clara opened it absent-mindedly, her eyes scanning the words until they froze on the bold letters at the top. Annual School Anniversary Gala, honoring past and present faculty and alumni. The date was circled, a reminder that time had carried her back to the point where her past and present were destined to collide. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she set the invitation down. She knew what this meant. Adrian would be there. He was always at such events, always eager to showcase his success, to remind the world of the heights he had climbed. Clara took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to Lily, who sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring with intense concentration. Fear tugged at her chest, the thought of facing Adrian again after all these years threatening to unravel her calm. But then she looked at her daughter, her reason, her anchor, and the fear began to fade. This time, things would be different. This time, she would walk into that room not as the broken woman who once begged for Adrian's love, but as the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. She would walk in with her head high, her daughter by her side, and let the truth speak for itself. For the first time in years, Clara smiled at the thought of the future. The gala would not be her downfall, it would be her moment. The school anniversary gala was brighter than Clara remembered. Golden chandeliers shimmered across the decorated hall, music hummed in the background, and laughter spilled like champagne. But this time, Clara walked in not as the silent wife of a powerful man, but as her own person. She wore a simple, elegant dress, her hair pinned with quiet confidence. Her daughter, Amelia, clung to her hand, her curious eyes soaking in the world. To Clara, this was enough. This was happiness. Yet the crowd shifted. A hush rolled through the room like an invisible tide. Whispers followed. "He's here." Adrian entered, flanked by associates, his polished presence commanding attention. He was every inch the man he had once become: untouchable, successful, admired. His smile was sharp, his suit immaculate. People moved aside as though he were royalty. But then, his eyes fell on Clara. For the first time in years, his composure cracked. She wasn't the quiet woman who once waited by the door for him to come home. She was radiant, alive, her laughter spilling freely as Amelia tugged at her sleeve. And when she looked up, her eyes no longer held longing, they held freedom. Adrian's hand tightened around his glass, the conversations around him blurred. For all his achievements, all his influence, this was the one sight he couldn't escape. Clara had found joy without him. And the little girl with her smile, with those determined eyes, she was proof that Adrian's absence had carved out a space another kind of love had filled. He had conquered the city, but he had lost the one treasure he could never buy back. Adrian couldn't stop watching her. Every smile, every tilt of her head, every moment she leaned down to whisper to her daughter, it was like a knife twisting deeper. For years, Clara had been a shadow in his life, invisible beneath his ambition. Now she stood brighter than the chandeliers above them, admired by those who once overlooked her. He moved through the crowd, his presence still commanding, but his steps carried a rare hesitation. He approached her table, his voice calm but low. "Clara." She turned slowly, as though greeting an old acquaintance rather than the man who had once ruled her life. Her smile was polite, distant. "Adrian." The sound of his name on her lips made his chest tighten, but before he could speak again, Lily tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mommy, can we go see the balloons?" Clara brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, her tone warm. "Of course, sweetheart. Just a moment." The word mommy hummed between them like a thunderclap. Adrian's gaze snapped to the little girl. His throat tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. "Yours?" he asked quietly. Clara's smile didn't waver. "Mine." And with that single word, Adrian's carefully built world began to fracture. He had spent years building empires, collecting victories, silencing rivals, but here stood the one person he could never command, never reclaim. Clara rose gracefully, taking Lily's hand. "Enjoy the evening, Adrian." Her footsteps echoed as she walked away, her presence leaving a silence louder than any applause. Adrian remained still, his grip on his glass unyielding. For the first time, power meant nothing. For the first time, he realized he had lost something no empire could restore. Adrian couldn't sleep that night. The gala replayed in his mind like a broken reel, the way Clara laughed, the way she looked through him as if he were nothing more than a shadow from her past. He poured himself another drink, staring out of his penthouse window. The city stretched before him, a kingdom he had built brick by brick. Yet for the first time, it felt hollow. Clara had moved on, without him. He needed to know more. Within days, his questions found answers. Discreet investigators reported back with neat files and photographs. Clara's modest apartment, her career as a beloved teacher, the circles of friends who adored her, and the little girl, Lily, who seemed to be her entire world. Adrian stared at the photos of Clara smiling, holding her daughter close. Something unfamiliar stirred in him: envy, regret, hunger. He told himself it wasn't about love. No, it was about pride. She had belonged to him once, and seeing her radiant without him was a wound he couldn't ignore. At a cafe one afternoon, fate seemed to conspire. Clara sat with Lily, the little girl giggling over a pastry. Adrian walked in, his timing deliberate, his charm effortless. "Clara," he greeted smoothly, as though their last encounter had been nothing. She glanced up, her guard rising instantly. "Adrian." Lily's eyes widened. "Who's that? Mommy?" Clara's tone was calm, steady. "Just someone I used to know." The dismissal burned. Adrian's jaw tightened, though his smile never faltered. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can try to erase me, Clara, but you and I both know, history doesn't vanish so easily." Clara's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. Instead, she took Lily's hand, paid the bill, and walked away without looking back. For Adrian, the silence was louder than any insult. And so, obsession took root. Weeks passed, but Adrian's shadow followed Clara everywhere. She would leave the school and see his car parked just down the street. At the market, she felt the weight of his gaze from across the aisles. He was always there, never saying much, just watching. At first, she ignored him, but one evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and she locked the school gates, his voice broke the silence. "Clara." She turned, clutching her bag tighter. Adrian stood a few steps away, his suit immaculate as ever, but there was something restless in his eyes. "You've made your point," he said softly. "You've shown me you can stand on your own, but you don't need to anymore. Come back." Clara's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Back? To being invisible? To waiting for a man who never cared if I lived or died?" Adrian flinched, the words striking deeper than he'd admit. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" She cut in, her voice rising. "You didn't make mistakes, Adrian. You made choices, and every one of them told me I was disposable." For a moment, silence stretched. The wind carried the sound of distant traffic, the hum of a city that didn't care about their war of words. Adrian's jaw clenched. "You think that man over there, whoever gave you that child, could give you what I can?" Clara stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "He gave me something you never could. A reason to live, a reason to be more than someone's ornament." Adrian's hand tightened at his side, his control slipping, but Clara turned, her voice steady as steel. "Stop following me. Stop clinging to a past you destroyed. My life isn't yours anymore." She walked away into the night, Lily's laughter echoing in her memory. Adrian remained behind, his chest heaving. For the first time, he wasn't the man in control, and that realization was unbearable. Adrian had always been a man of order, contracts, negotiations, strategy. His life had been built on control, but Clara's rejection left cracks in that order, and through them, something darker began to seep. Nights grew longer. His penthouse, once a symbol of triumph, now felt like a cage. He sat in the dark with half-empty glasses of whiskey, replaying her words. My life isn't yours anymore. Each repetition festered. He began calling in favors, quietly, discreetly, a friend at City Hall, a contact in the education board. He wanted leverage, anything that might force Clara back into his orbit. It wasn't love, not truly, it was possession. Soon, whispers reached Clara, a denied permit for her school program, unexpected audits, small cracks in the life she had rebuilt. She knew whose hand was behind it. And yet, she stood firm. Each obstacle only steeled her resolve. For Lily's sake, she refused to bend. Adrian watched from afar, frustration boiling. The more he tried to tighten his grip, the further she slipped away. One evening, he sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. His reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, tired, haunted. For the first time, he wondered if he had become the very thing he had always despised, a man defined not by power, but by the emptiness it couldn't fill. Still, he couldn't let go. Adrian whispered to the empty room, his voice low, trembling with obsession. If I can't have you, Clara, no one will. The words lingered in the silence, heavy, dangerous, and final. The attacks on Clara's life grew bolder. The school board questioned her teaching methods. A landlord threatened to raise her rent. Even the parents of her students began receiving anonymous letters filled with lies. Clara knew Adrian's hand was in every shadow. For a moment, the weight nearly crushed her. Late at night, she would sit at the edge of her bed, Lily asleep beside her, and wonder if she had the strength to keep fighting. But each time she looked at her daughter's face, peace washing over her small features, the answer came clear. She had no choice but to fight back. The next morning, Clara walked into the school not with fear, but with fire. She rallied her colleagues, telling them the truth, that someone was trying to destroy everything they had built. Instead of recoiling, they stood with her. The community, parents, and even students began to rally behind Clara. Letters of support flooded in. Local reporters picked up her story. The more Adrian tried to crush her, the brighter her name spread. One evening, as Clara closed her classroom, Adrian appeared again, but this time, her shoulders didn't shake, her hands didn't falter. You think you can outplay me? He sneered, his mask of composure cracking. Clara's voice was calm, steady. I don't need to outplay you, Adrian. I just need to keep standing, and every time you push me down, I rise stronger, because I'm not standing for me anymore. I'm standing for her. She gestured toward the window, where Lily laughed with friends outside. For the first time, Adrian had no words. The man who had crushed rivals in courtrooms and boardrooms now stood speechless before the woman he once dismissed. Clara stepped past him, her voice leaving a final mark. You can try to haunt me, Adrian, but you'll never own me again. And with that, she walked into the night, her resolve unshakable, her freedom undeniable. Adrian remained, consumed by silence, his empire of control beginning to crumble. Adrian's world unraveled piece by piece. The quiet power he once commanded began to falter. Business partners grew wary of his erratic decisions. Rumors spread of his obsession with a woman who had walked away from him. To rivals, he no longer looked untouchable, he looked weak. At first, Adrian fought harder. He poured money into lawsuits, whispered threats into the right ears, tried to bend the city back under his control. But the more he clawed, the more it slipped away. Meanwhile, Clara's name only grew brighter. The story of the teacher who stood against corruption spread through news outlets, inspiring countless others. Parents and students alike spoke of her resilience. She became more than just a woman defying her past, she became a symbol. Adrian watched from the shadows as Clara stood on a small stage one evening, addressing the community. Lily held her hand, her smile proud, her eyes reflecting the future her mother had fought to protect. The applause thundered, cameras flashed. Clara's voice was strong, filled with hope. Adrian felt the weight of it all crash down on him. For years, he had believed power was measured in wealth, in victories, in fear. But here, in the light of a modest school auditorium, he finally understood he had lost the only thing that could have made him whole. Not just Clara, not just the child, but the chance to be more than the empty shell he had become. He left the hall without a word, the noise of celebration fading behind him. Alone, he returned to his penthouse, staring once more at the city he had conquered. But this time, it no longer looked like triumph. It looked like ashes. Adrian set his glass down, his reflection in the window fractured and unrecognizable. The empire remained, the wealth untouched. But inside, he had collapsed. Clara had walked away, and she had taken his last chance at redemption with her. Months passed. For Clara, life settled into a rhythm of warmth and quiet victories. Mornings began with Lily's laughter, afternoons with the hum of a classroom alive with questions, evenings with friends who valued her for who she was, not for what she could offer. She no longer looked over her shoulder. The shadows Adrian cast had faded, replaced by sunlight breaking through every window of her life. She had not only survived, she had bloomed. Adrian, meanwhile, drifted deeper into silence. Business partners distanced themselves. His name whispered with pity rather than fear. His empire still stood, but he wandered its halls alone, a king without a kingdom, haunted by memories of what he had destroyed. Sometimes, late at night, he would imagine Clara's laughter echoing through his home, Lily's small footsteps running across the marble floors. But those visions always dissolved into emptiness. One had built a future on love, resilience, and hope. The other had built an empire on ambition, pride, and possession. And in the end, the empire crumbled first. As the sun set on Adrian's hollow reign, Clara's dawn continued to rise, brighter, freer, and stronger than he had ever allowed her to be. Her story was no longer one of survival. It was a story of rebirth,